Nicolas, are you able to see some of the answers?
Uh, Not at all. I was just logged out. I don't know why, so I will try
Oh, okay.
to check the answers.
Hi,
It's
Barbara. Yeah, jumping in. 89% we have mind maps.
okay.
Nothing else. Oh no, 33% concept maps, 22% system maps, same for stakeholder maps, 0 for evidence maps.
Okay, that's interesting. That's very good. All right,
Mm.
excellent. It's not super surprising, but really good. Good to know. All right, I'm gonna keep going then. That's good. All right, so here's an example of a simple map, nothing to do with international development. So, and don't attempt to read some of the maps. Some of the fonts are going to be too small. The point is not to understand the details of the map, but these are more like samples or examples of the different shapes and things like that. So, and I put a link when you get the slides, or you'll be able to go to my website and see some of these maps that I've included. Obviously, this one has nothing to do with international development. So you've got a central concept. This is kind of a simple mind map. You've got a central concept. In this case, it's French composers. It's actually just composers of the film soundtrack, but you have the names of the specific composers as the nodes going away from the center. And then the next layer is the specific movies that the respective composers worked on. In this case, I overcomplicated it probably and put pictures and links. But when you start creating layers of complexity on your maps, you sometimes detract from the main point of the map or the readability. So adding visual clues within a map is sometimes not the right way to go. This was me just having some fun with a simple map. Uh, I'm just going to move on to the next type. So this is more of an example that I'm trying to relate to an international development challenge. And here you've got a little mind map that's not even filled. It's just the kind of the structure of a typical mind map where you have the central concept. In this case, it's 7 solutions to global hunger. And you've got the radiating concept on the outer layer. And then for each idea for a solution, you've got sub-arguments. And this is kind of the structure of a typical mind map. So again, very simple. Obviously, you would fill it with content. This is just the structure. Concept maps. So they're slightly different as a knowledge map, where the mind maps have branches and sub-branches and few connections across, if any. Concept maps are all about concepts and connections between the concepts. So the concept maps have concept, the nodes, just like a mind map, and they have links or relationships. And most importantly, they have connecting or linking words, which those connecting words are very important because they explain the nature of the relationship between two concepts. So this one is coming straight from the folks who kind of put this method together, concept mapping. So you've got the nodes, the relationships, and the linking words, so the connections. And so these are all very important aspects of the map. And again, different types of maps are best for different types of um, purposes. And thank you, Christine, for sharing the results. Excellent. Thank you so much. Here's a simple application of a concept map. I was taking a permaculture design course, nothing to do with international development, although it could be. And the first assignment was to articulate some goals for our permaculture design. So my main goals were to increase biodiversity, improve the soil, improve water management, and build a small greenhouse or cold frame. The second level below that was more about the how. How was I going to do it, and how I was going to achieve those goals. And then you'll notice some connecting lines across the various items. So you see the simple connecting words, and you see some connecting lines across the different aspects of the map, so that it doesn't look like a mind map anymore because it has more cross connections between different concepts that are in different places on the map. This is where some of the strength of mapping show up, when you can connect things that aren't as easy to connect in a more narrative form, for example. So, and you can, yeah, I put the link here to see the collection of little maps that I have. Those are more illustrative, but they're not really, you know, they're not necessarily perfect examples of good maps. So let me keep going. So there will be times when you're working on a map and it becomes a mess of connections. And don't try to read this particular map. On the surface, this looks much more like a concept map than a mind map. It has concepts and connecting lines with arrows that suggest a relationship. However, you'll notice that there are no connecting words, making it really challenging to understand the specific meaning of the lines and the arrows. So it's hard to say what the relationship between the concepts is. You can assume that to read this map, each connecting line has the same meaning. So because there's no explanation of the line, you have to assume that concept A has some kind of impact on concept B on the map. And so it's definitely not a precise relationship. It doesn't have those connecting words to help explain that relationship. I'm also quite aware that presenting maps like this out of context is quite unfair. It's a little bit like extracting a paragraph out of a book and expecting the reader to understand that paragraph out of context. So I'm showing this map just to highlight the importance of clarity, especially in the connections or relationships between concepts. I don't mean to say that this map is not good, because in the context of a book or an article or a paper that it was presented in, it might actually make a lot of sense. Out of context, without the connecting words, it does not make a lot of sense, at least not to me. But it's unfair, so it's just an unfair map. So here's yet another kind of map. This systems map looks like a concept map, but it attempts to use color to differentiate certain nodes, for example. It seems to assume that each connecting line with an arrow has the same meaning, so A leads to B kind of approach. It's trying to show how various elements lead to food insecurity, but also how food insecurity impacts mental and physical health as well as educational outcomes. So it's an interesting way of trying to present how different aspects of food security are interconnected. These types of maps attempt to document our mental models, how we think that things are connected. In that way, they're similar or related to theories of change, which in international development we're very familiar with. Anytime you design an intervention in international development, you develop a proposal for a project, you're doing so within the context of a theory of change or a mental model that makes all kinds of assumptions about how things are connected in the real world and where your intervention might have the right impact. So being able to model the broader environment, the ecosystem where your intervention is going to have an impact is important. So you will be looking for the lever, the intervention in a system that will have the anticipated positive impact. And if you're able to visualize all of these different aspects of your intervention within the ecosystem, I think it can help clarify what you're trying to do. I'm probably a little biased, but I think that most of our theories of change are oversimplifications that don't adequately address the broader system and don't really articulate well why we think a particular intervention will have an impact within the broader system. So that's also why I like maps that show the broader ecosystem of connectivity across different things. Okay, so and I see Michael is among the participants, so you might be familiar with Michael Bell, might be familiar with some of this. Here's a completely different application of knowledge mapping. When I worked at NASA, we conducted more than 100 pause and learn sessions, pause and reflect sessions. They were called pause and learn in that context. instead of taking notes in a linear fashion, we generated conversation maps. The process for planning and implementing the sessions and then drafting and finalizing the maps was centered around really optimizing the learning opportunities. And this was a great case of tailoring the mapping to adapt to an existing process, the pause and learn session. So the pause and learn or pause and reflect sessions already existed as a process to facilitate team reflection. And the mapping was added as a way to document the sessions and facilitate learning and sharing. This illustrated many of the different benefits of knowledge mapping that I spoke about earlier. There's the visual representation of knowledge, there's the facilitation of knowledge sharing, but also learning and even supporting decision making. So this was where I really learned to go deep into concept mapping for the purpose of documenting pause and learn sessions. So keeping in still with this particular application, imagine more than 100 conversations, pause and learn conversations. Each results in 4 or 5 conversation or knowledge maps. So the maps can be constructed from multiple sources beyond just the pause and learn conversations. In the NASA case, most of the content came from the pause and learn sessions, pause and reflect sessions. But you could add content from other materials that acted as supplement to the conversations. There could be documents that could be added to it and mapped into the conversation. So I started creating a map of maps or a web of interconnected maps. And the connections that were created were around recurring topics. So let's say that team communications always or very often came up as a topic for discussion in pause and reflect sessions. So I eventually created a repository of maps that allowed you to traverse the maps from different pause and learn sessions based on that particular topic to see, you could see quickly which projects had encountered similar issues and how they addressed them. From a management point of view, you could see trends across different projects over time. And you could see when a specific challenge kept coming up and it could become red flags for management that something needed to be addressed at the institutional level rather than just a project by project approach. The other big benefit of this mapping approach was that a specific lesson or key takeaway was never really more than a click away from the original conversation. So you could always quickly get to the context of the conversation and not lose that context. Sometimes when you put lessons learned in a database, you end up losing the context, the original conversation or the original event that triggered that lesson. I think that's some of the challenges with lessons learned processes. That being said, I was using a tool that wasn't really meant to scale to hundreds of maps, and that's an issue with different tools that we might be using. And in addition, the manual mapping process required a certain level of acquired skills, I would say, that made it less than ideal from a sustainability perspective and maintainability. The tools that we select need to be not just scalable, but also sustainable over time, depending on the kinds of capabilities that are needed to maintain those. So to make this process of mapping and aggregating the maps a little bit more standardized and more transferable to other people who could do it, I created this template to explain what a conversation map was supposed to look like in the abstract. So in the abstract, it's a little similar to an ontology in that it's a schema for documenting the conversation. We've got the project name to quickly see what you're referring to, the key topics that came out of the conversation, and then the details of the conversation, which I call them observations, which is essentially little paraphrasing of key elements of the conversation. And obviously these things are connected, but in a transcript of a pause and learn session or a conversation, things are kind of circular, they come back to the same topic and all that. And when you're mapping the conversation, you're able to synthesize and not go through the full transcript one line at a time. You don't map one line at a time, you map the the key elements of the conversation. And then at the bottom, you had the recommendations or the lessons or key takeaways that were easy to see because they were just highlighted in a different color. And those were connected based on the topic that they were touching on. So that's all for the NASA example. Here's yet another type of application. Going back a little bit to our global food security issue, which I addressed in some of the maps, not all. Imagine that you're about to take over the leadership of a food security project, and you're like in the second year of a 5-year project. I'm just putting a little scenario out there. How would you do? How would a rapid stakeholder mapping exercise help you to get quick up to speed to make informed decisions? How would you visually represent that? I think network mapping, social network analysis, stakeholder mapping, all of these forms of knowledge mapping that you may already be familiar with would be helpful in this particular context. So this is an example of a knowledge map, a stakeholder mapping that would help with analysis. So you'll see that it has different types of lines. It's also an example of a map where you're relying much more on technology to draw the map. This is not done by hand, even with a mapping tool. This is based on data that's collected in specialized tools. So this is also where specific capabilities and technologies might come into play. So it's just higher level of complexity. I started with simple mind maps. We're now going to higher levels of complexity in terms of the different tools that we want to use and the different applications. So we're now going to go even deeper into technology-enabled applications of knowledge mapping. This is an example of topic modeling. So many organizations are struggling to manage their data. Often the conversation around data is really focused on structured data, but in reality, organizations sit on large volumes of unstructured data. And from an information and knowledge management perspective, unstructured data may be as important, if not more important, than structured data. So what do I mean by unstructured data? I mean all of our documents, text, all of our video content, emails, audio content that we have in our probably messy file structures. So with emerging technologies, these vast volumes of unstructured data can be analyzed in much faster and easier ways than in the past. And one method for analysis is topic modeling. So topic modeling can serve as a tool to generate the content for knowledge maps by identifying main themes and topics within a corpus of text. So you could identify the 100 most recent papers in food security and extract themes and topics. I'll show you that in the next slide. But here, this was an example of topic modeling that was done by Viva Topics, which was past tense, a Microsoft product that I want to say played with, but piloted for more than 2 years. Unfortunately, it was retired. It's being retired by Microsoft, but it was using artificial intelligence and the Microsoft Graph to generate these very interesting maps of related topics by analyzing the content of documents. So this is an example of what the kinds of maps that it was generating. Again, it's because this was generated automatically. I mean, there was a layer of human intervention and human curation, but this was much more sophisticated in terms of technology used to generate the map to begin with, or the different maps. I see a question, is there a new comparable tool to Viva Topics? That's an interesting question. Just a couple of days ago, I watched a webinar on another tool that is presumably kind of trying to replicate what Viva Topics did. So I don't want to necessarily publicize different tools, but yes, there is there are approaches, and even though Viva Topics itself as a tool is not surviving, the emphasis on topic modeling, I think, is still going to be extremely relevant in a world of large language models and AI applications. So I think topic modeling itself is what we should be interested in, and different tools will be able to do that. It doesn't have to be something directly comparable to Viva Topics. Okay, so here's an example of topic modeling related to food security. So this is much more sophisticated analysis and technology to analyze large volumes of documents and structured data, therefore, from the academic literature on food security. So this provided, and I wasn't involved in this, I'm just looking at different examples that I could find. So the analysis provided a thematic scoping of the entire food security literature and an assessment of the biases and things. So it was very interesting kind of research into the food security literature. So in this particular map, the size of the node corresponds to the topic's relative share of the literature, and the size of the connections between topics corresponds to the strength of that those connections. And then you've got a bunch of topics at the bottom, right, that are just not connected to other topics. Not sure why, but they're still related to food security, but they don't have a lot of interconnectivity with the rest of the literature, which we should probably ask why, but that's for the researchers to do. So that's an interesting kind of approach to topic mapping or topic modeling. Okay, so I started with simple maps, and now I'm going towards artificial intelligence, machine learning, those kinds of things. Artificial intelligence and in particular machine learning can help facilitate knowledge mapping at much larger scales than what is possible with just human manipulation of information alone. Like that's when I reached some of the limitations of the tools when I was doing knowledge maps at NASA with those conversations, hundreds of maps into one tool with only one person manipulating those maps. You reach some limits where, you know, this is no longer the right approach. There are advanced tools now that have a great deal of potential for enhanced analysis of vast volumes of unstructured data. And I list some of these things here. And this is an area where I'm still very much learning, so don't ask me too many deep questions around this. A couple of things to keep in mind as we get into this more advanced technology. There's the typical garbage in, garbage out that will impact outcomes of your analysis. If your unstructured data, all of your documents, if that's all totally disorganized, like many SharePoint environments are, if it lacks metadata or any kind of structure, if it lacks a semantic layer, essentially, your results may be disappointing and you may have trouble really analyzing this messy data. You also should have a very clear business case or multiple business cases in mind. No one wants to manage knowledge for the sake of managing knowledge, and you certainly shouldn't be trying to map knowledge just for the sake of mapping. So you still need to go back to basics of good knowledge management, which is to identify what's the critical knowledge in that particular organization, and you need a sense of whether that critical knowledge can be extracted from unstructured data or not. And you need to set up your advanced tool to target specific business needs. So don't fall in love with the technology too much. Make sure that you're addressing specific business needs. Can't repeat that too many times. I strongly believe that the future of knowledge mapping at scale is in knowledge graphs. And so I will talk a little bit in the next few slides about knowledge graphs. But the reason I started with discussing simpler knowledge maps is that I think understanding how the simpler knowledge maps are constructed and their benefits and applications can be very useful to more fully grasp the potential of knowledge graphs. And that's the whole reason for this presentation. It's like understanding knowledge mapping is a good first step to understanding knowledge graphs. So even in the smaller graphs, the simpler graphs, I've been talking about nodes and relationships. knowledge graphs are made up of nodes and relationships. Big difference between a lot of the simpler maps that I've been talking about is that computers don't understand simple mind maps and can't really read mind maps and concept maps the way that they can read text. At least they can't do it well right now. I'm sure technology will evolve where they understand mind maps and all kinds of things. But right now, the information in a map needs to be provided in a machine readable way, and that's what knowledge graphs do. They make the nodes and relationships readable by machines so that when you have 1 million nodes and 2 million connections, obviously you need it to be very rigorous in terms of the relationships and readable by machines so that you can use all of these new fancy technologies. And by the way, knowledge graphs can really help enhance the performance of large language models. If you're piloting Copilot or some other large language models in an organization and you discover that it's spitting out not garbage but less than ideal results, you might want to consider your semantic layer and whether a knowledge graph would help you address some of these challenges of large language models, including hallucinations. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I mentioned before at one point that I'm really still in very much a learning mode. I'm spending a lot of my time these days learning about knowledge graphs and applying a learning by doing approach. So I'm trying to build a personal knowledge graph. And the idea is that I could extend my grasp of knowledge mapping to scaled up instances of knowledge maps like knowledge graphs. And I'll show you a glimpse or some glimpses of what I'm doing. So to start up this action learning project, I started since January of this year, taking notes around knowledge graphs, but all kinds of other things. So I have more than 2,000 little notes that so that's a lot of unstructured data in a single HTML file using a tool called TiddlyWiki. I have 4 key themes, so I've organized my mental framework into 4 key themes and a dozen topics. So there's a little bit of a taxonomy in there, a simple ontology framing my learning agenda for 2024. There's a lot of manual curation that wouldn't happen if I used some more sophisticated technology, but the manual curation is helping me to learn how tagging and linking things within my system corresponds to more automated processes if I was using more sophisticated technology. So the result is one growing personal knowledge graph using some of what's called TiddlyMap functionality within a plugin within TiddlyWiki. And I've managed to do a dozen topic graphs. So let's see some details of this. Again, I'm just showing you some glimpses. It's not a full demo. So this is a high-level view of my personal learning agenda for 2024, which is the basis for this knowledge graph experiment. There are 4 themes, a dozen topics. So this is the high-level structure, the high-level taxonomy for my graph. And again, this is kind of the semantic layer, so that when I query the graph, it will actually know what I'm talking about. All right, here's what happens when I put a query in my graph or in my map or in my system. Out of 2,000 plus nodes, I pulled everything that I had tagged as PKM or personal knowledge management as a topic. And you can see that this becomes quite messy, right? You can't really, the human eye doesn't really make a huge amount of sense out of this. But if it's machine readable, you can get much more out of this. It doesn't have to be readable by the human eye because it has all of the important connections in the back end. So let me try to show you with the next slide what it does when I query more specifically, and I rely here on some filters. So here's, in this case, I queried the knowledge graph and authors, meaning the topic of knowledge graph, and authors, which I've tagged with knowledge graph expertise. So if I combine a couple of things, it pulls out all of these different, which is much more readable. This one is much more readable because I was much more specific in the types of filters that I used. So this particular tool doesn't allow me to use natural language processing. So I don't have like a little text box where I can say, hey, I want a graph or a map of everything related to knowledge graphs and personal knowledge management. I can't do that. I still have to use a filter in the back end with a query language. So ideally, for an enterprise application, you want to apply a natural language processing tool that will allow people to just ask the question. It will be interpreted by the tool and then turned into a query, and the results are pulled back differently. But this is just me playing around with a little tool that I have access to and trying to understand how to structure things so that they can be put into a bigger, more scalable knowledge map graph type thing. All right, question 2, if you're able to go to the Slido, what challenges have you faced or can you anticipate when trying to create and use knowledge graphs in your work? And I realize that knowledge graphs are still a relatively new technology for most people. So what, among the things that I put there, what do you think would be the most challenging thing? So difficulty in choosing the right tools, the lack of training or expertise, level of complexity involved, lack of stakeholder buy-in, difficulty in articulating tangible benefits, costs, or it could be something else. So I'll give you a minute or two. And that will give me time to breathe a little bit. And if there are any questions at this point, we'll have more time for questions, I believe, but feel free to put questions in the chat as well.
We have a comment from Kelly. Good idea to build a personal knowledge graph to play and learn. Looks very good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I after more than 20 years of working in knowledge management, I think I'm going back to some of my original interests in personal knowledge management. And I actually believe that any knowledge manager should start with a good grasp of personal knowledge management and understand how not only themselves, but other people that they're going to be working with who may not be knowledge managers handle knowledge management for their own knowledge. And so not only do I find it useful for myself to focus on personal knowledge management, I think every knowledge manager should start with that as well. And I'm actually going to be emphasizing that to my students in the fall. Let's start with personal knowledge management. All right. Natalia or Nicola, are you able to see some of the answers?
Yes, we have the answers, and Natalia put them in the chat. So
sorry.
We have 80, so we had 14 answers, and out of 14, 86% said that the lack of training or expertise is the main challenge faced or could have been faced. and followed by 57% of difficulty in choosing the right tools, 43% level of complexity involved, 29% lack of stakeholder buy-in, 7% costs, and 43%, oh, sorry, it was at the bottom, 43% difficulty in articulating tangible benefits. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I see some other comments in the chat. Excellent. So, from Mike, yeah, the personal map is just a place to start. You're right. That's the benefits will be limited, and if I can't figure out a way to, it's mostly for learning purposes that I'm doing that. I just want to learn what are the challenges that I encounter when I'm doing it for myself, and how would that translate or be even more challenging, obviously, when I try to extrapolate that to large organizations. Wikipedia is already a knowledge graph. So there are lots of examples of knowledge graphs. Wikipedia is based on a knowledge graph, the same as Google, the Google graph. There's lots of graphs out there that we use already. We may not be aware of it. And by the way, that's an interesting side note. A knowledge graph could be used in very different ways within an organization, depending on the different use cases. In one use case, it's the back end of a large language model, and the user doesn't see it at all because it's just enhancing the results of a large language model, but it's not really, you're not interacting directly with the graph. You're interacting with a text box where you put your query. But there are more sophisticated applications where you would need to interact directly with your graph. And so, I mean, there's so many different applications that I'm trying to figure out how to work them out. So I'm going to keep going a little bit. Those were great answers, great comments as well. All right. So areas, yeah.
Sorry, we had a question from Linda. Is there a particular tool you suggest starting with that doesn't have a huge cost associated with it? I don't really want to do advertising for specific tools, but if you want to use something for a personal knowledge map, there's TiddlyWiki, there's Obsidian, there's all kinds of tools. Some of them have a version that's free. TiddlyWiki and TiddlyMap are completely free. But there are, when you get something free, there are all kinds of challenges with them as well. In terms of large-scale knowledge graph tools, you can always look up Neo4j is what I'm trying to learn to use, and that's potentially very useful at the enterprise level. But again, I have not used them myself, so I'm just learning what the tools are available. I have no idea of cost just yet. All right, so I keep saying that I'm still learning. So I'm trying to identify specific areas to explore beyond my own personal knowledge graphs, and in a scarce resource environment, how can we develop approaches that are practical, that respond to a real need, and that are scalable? Those are the kinds of questions I'm asking myself. And can knowledge graphs support in an international development context specifically? Can it support sector-specific or cross-sector modeling around global challenges? That would be much more complex. Can knowledge graphs help to bridge the gap between personal knowledge management, like we just said, and organization-wide knowledge management? I don't know yet. And I'm actually spending the next few weeks reflecting on some of these questions and ultimately presenting some ideas for further research and explorations at a June meeting of the KMGN, which is Knowledge Management Global Network Research Community. It's a June 19th webinar. So you're welcome to join me there if you're interested in kind of the next chapter of this little adventure. So to recap some of the key applications that I mentioned, and it may not have been obvious when I was showing some of the maps, so just a recap. You can use knowledge maps to show the evidence behind a proposed theory of change for a project or intervention. So evidence maps can come in many different forms, but it could be a knowledge map or knowledge graph.
You can use a knowledge map to document conversations, identify key insights or lessons. You can use a knowledge map to document stakeholder interactions in support of additional engagement or change management. And you can get deeper into the technology enhanced applications or implementations of knowledge maps by doing topic modeling to support taxonomy development, ontologies, and enhanced search and support for large language models. So essentially deepening your semantic layer across your systems. I'm sure you can add your own ideas about how to use knowledge mapping in support of very specific objectives that you may be interested in. I see some additional questions. So if I don't have time to answer the questions, please follow up with me on LinkedIn. And I think we'll share my email as well. So to conclude, I think I'll just go back to what I said at the very beginning. I see knowledge mapping as a tool for critical thinking and decision making. And I think a lot of the future of knowledge mapping is in knowledge graphs because of the technology's potential. I could be wrong, of course, but since simple maps are great for clarifying one's thinking, there's a point where the scale of our data, the information and knowledge requires more sophisticated tools for aggregation and analysis. So I hope that this presentation showed you how knowledge mapping can be applied in many different contexts, but also how it relates to the big wave of new AI-driven technologies opening up new opportunities. And there's a final question here for you. And after this question, I just have a couple of slides of additional resources. So even if you are leaving now, which would be fine, there will be a recording that shows the resources that I'm sharing as well. And thank you so much for all of you who came. We're gonna give you a minute or so to answer the question, and I'm kind of not aware of the time right now, but hopefully we're still good on time.
So it's 6 o'clock. I will just drop for those who are leaving because you might have a meeting or something. The contact of Barbara and the contact of us, Council KM International, by email in case you're just about to leave right now.
Thank you,
But
Nicolas.
for the rest, you will continuing the webinar, so you can stay. It's not done.
Well, it's almost done. We're almost there. We had some good questions, and so that was great. So if you were able to answer this question, the last question, great. So it was a pleasure really presenting on this topic. And if there are questions I didn't answer, again, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via my email. That would be great. And I do have some related books and resources for those who are interested in going further. So one of the latest books is by Maria Keat, The What and How of Modeling Information and Knowledge. She doesn't touch on knowledge graphs, but she does touch on the different types of, from mind maps to more sophisticated ways of mapping things. And then there are a number of books around concept mapping and other things that are kind of related topics, which I think would be useful. And if you want to look at some specific examples, I put some links here as well. Some of them are related to international development, not all, to get an idea of how knowledge graphs materialize. This was a lot of little examples, but I didn't show you large knowledge graphs and how it gets used, because that's a little, I don't actually have those myself. But it was a pleasure talking to you, presenting on this issue, which I'm very passionate about. And I look forward to further conversations. And thank you so much to Consult KM for putting this together and allowing me to present.
You're welcome, Barbara. Thank you very much to everyone. If you could please just take 2 minutes to fill the feedback survey, which will automatically appear on your screen while leaving the meeting. We will be grateful for that. I also sent you a big message with our contact on LinkedIn, YouTube, even like Facebook and Instagram, plus the emails of Barbara and our email at Council KM International. So thank you very much. And we also had, maybe if some have time to stay, one question from Tanisha, who asked a little bit before if we had some, what was it? Some tools, resources, and books to suggest for a student of policy to connect theories, case studies, links, etc. Some of the participants have already answered, but what's your opinion about that, Barbara?
Yeah, I would be happy to have an additional conversation offline around that, because I would need to know a little bit more. I have lots of resources, but to be more specific in terms of answering the questions. So feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, there's lots of personal knowledge management tools that I'm aware of, and then but those are very different from the types of knowledge graph tools and concepts that might be useful at an organizational level. And in terms of research, that's something I'm digging into a little further as well. So I would be happy to share additional resources. There, after the link is posted on LinkedIn, this would be probably the best place to share additional thoughts and resources and answer questions. So I'll be happy to make sure to follow up there.
Thank you.
Okay,
you.
I'm gonna
Great.
stop sharing. All right, thank you all for coming.
Christy, sorry, Christy, you had a question or something? I saw you unmuted you, no?
Oh no, I was just saying thank you. This has been great.
Okay.
I really loved it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much.